Good evening. Good evening. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Thank you all for being here on a Wednesday evening and spending your time with us this evening. My name is Pat Kwitzel, and I am with Magic City Books, and I want to be the first to welcome you this evening to this wonderful event. We are very excited that you are here tonight, and we really want to thank TCC for being a partner with us again and hosting us in this wonderful facility. If this is your first time here, this room has been home to a number of author events from Booksmart Tulsa and Magic City Books through the years, and so we've been over here a number of times, and TCC is a great partner in this, and so we really appreciate you all being here tonight, and we appreciate TCC. We're also really excited to be partnering tonight and putting this event together with Oklahoma Policy Institute. And Oklahoma Policy Institute is doing some amazing work, and if you didn't get an opportunity before you sat down to check out their table with some of their materials, I really encourage you to take a look at some of the things that they have going on and some of the information that's out there. As a nonpartisan organization, they're just here to be able to provide some information to citizens of Oklahoma and do an excellent job of being able to do that. And so we really appreciate Oklahoma Policy Institute, and special thanks to our friend David Blatt, the director of Oklahoma Policy Institute. And so tonight, our conversation is going to be led by Demario Solomon Simmons, a Tulsa native and an attorney and legislative liaison for the Oklahoma Policy Institute. Demario is a Booker T. Washington Hall of Fame inductee and a University of Oklahoma. Excuse me, I'm a University of Tulsa graduate, so I sometimes try and sneak that in and give us more credit than we get. He's a University of Oklahoma graduate and a former OU linebacker. Demario is also serving as the lead counsel for the family of Terrence Crutcher. And our special guest this evening is Danielle Allen. Danielle is the James Bryant Conant, University Professor at Harvard University and Director of Harvard's Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics. She is a political theorist and author of many books, including tonight's focus, her most personal work yet, Cuz. If that's not impressive enough, Danielle is a chair of the Mellon Foundation Board, past chair of the Pulitzer Prize Board, and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Philosophical Society. Please give a warm welcome to Demario Solomon Simmons and Danielle Allen.
Thank you, Pat, for the warm welcome. I know you're in charge, but I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you so much to all of you for being here, and David for your incredible hospitality, and the Oklahoma Policy Institute, which is fantastic. David and I connected because a couple of years ago I was sort of doing a survey of the landscape of state policy think tanks, and I thought the work that I was seeing here was the best in the whole country. So I wrote to David and said, gosh, could we talk? I'd like to know more about what you're doing. And it's terrific to now be able to come as a visitor to Tulsa and learn more in person. So thank you, and thank you for hosting.
Thank you for allowing me to be on a stage with her. Give her another round of applause. I'm truly honored to be here with you, Doc. Danielle, you told me to call you Danielle, I know. So I do want to make one correction. I had the good fortune of being the legislative liaison for OK Policy for 3 years, but I was replaced by a much better looking and better legislative liaison, Bailey Perkins, if you would stand. So that is the legislative liaison. So I have a lot of my questions on my phone, so I'm not being rude when I'm looking at my phone here. So I'm excited, Doc, for us to just really kind of just dig in as we were kind of talking beforehand. I think the first thing that just struck me, I saw in one of your videos, you talked about the title of the book, Cuz, that you felt like the title of the book made the book. And you said some other things about Cuz we were talking about. But first, can you explain to us, to me, why do you feel like the title, Cuz, 3 words, made the book?
Thank you. Yes. So you all know cuz means cousin, right? And the book is about my cousin and my beloved cousin who called me cuz, right? And so it captures that bond between us. But just to quickly tell you Michael's story, we all, a big extended family, grew up together in Southern California. And when Michael was 15 in 1995, he was arrested for an attempted carjacking in South Central. And it's a terrible thing to stand up in front of a group of people and say that somebody you loved did something like that. The only good thing about Michael's attempted carjacking, and this is a terrible thing to put it that way, the only good thing is that the only person who got hurt was Michael. So in that regard, he was partly lucky, partly very inexperienced, holding the gun pointed to the ground, as per his witnesses, his victim's testimony. The victim wrestled away his gun and shot him through the neck. And on the way to the hospital, he confessed that he had also robbed 4 other people that week at gunpoint. So without any question, it was a spree of violent crime. It came out of nowhere and took us completely by surprise. It was 1995 in California. The state had recently passed the 3 strikes you're out law. They had just a few months earlier lowered the rate at which juveniles could be charged as adults to 14. So at any rate, Michael understood that if he went to trial, the judge told him and was convicted on all the things he'd confessed to, he would receive a sentence of 25 years to life. So he pled guilty instead of going to trial and took a sentence of 12 years and 8 months, served 11, and got out when he was 26. I was the cousin on duty, as I describe it, trying to help with the basics, job, housing, schooling, and so forth. But long story short, Michael was killed 3 years after his first release by the lover he'd met in prison during his years there. So Michael died in 2009, and my family shut down about it. We didn't talk about it, about what happened to Michael. And so when I, too many years, embarrassingly number of years later, came to write about Michael's story, it was with this just kind of burning need for answers to the why question. I think every family that's lost somebody young knows that why question, that one that really hurts, right? Why was he dead? Why had he been in prison for so long? And the hardest question of all, why had he ended up on that street corner holding a gun trying to take somebody's car? He came from a big family that loved him, people with resources. Why had this kid turned onto this path? So it's like, 'cause of this, 'cause of that. So the book is the answers to those why questions. So, and that was, I was starting to think about writing this, and literally like one night, I was like, 'cause. That's what this project is called. It's called 'cause he's my cuz, and 'cause I'm trying to figure out why.
You also said that 'cuz is a one-word poem.
Yes.
What does that mean? Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so this means talking about poetry, right? So I think poets have a really special job in our society. Shelley famously called them the legislators of the world, actually, because at the end of the day, what we notice in our world, what we see, the values that we have, that's what really shapes our world, right? Underneath everything. And it's poets who really shape our line of sight. And so when I say it's a one-word poem, what I meant was I had all these questions, all this material. I was trying to understand the world. I was trying to identify a line of sight, and I found it when that word came to me. And so that word captures a lot. It captures the importance of those family bonds. It captures how even those family bonds can keep us from understanding each other, leave us with all of these why questions. And that's where the problem is. All right? When families aren't talking to each other, and we're not bringing the trouble to the surface, we're not understanding it, we can't look at it squarely, then we can't fix it. We can't actually help if we don't achieve understanding. So for me, some poems are luck. Some poems, you work your way through to their shape and the crystallizing that they provide you. This one was a luck poem.
I see. How many of you actually have read the book already? So not very many people. Okay, well, I hope this works out, because I'm really going to be selfish and ask all these questions because I have read it, and hopefully you can get something out of it. You know, Doc, we were talking earlier before we got started how your book really resonated with me because I identify with Michael and a lot how Michael grew up, you know, in the inner city, dealing with a lot of inner city things, but I also identify so much with what you talk about and how you grew up and how there's that closeness of your family, but there's also that distance.
Yep.
Because of the different worlds, even though you saw Michael every week.
Right.
The different worlds. Let's talk a little bit about how that closeness, but also the distance, and how that created the dichotomy of your relationship with Michael.
So this is a huge and important topic, and I think it really does go to the heart of African American experience in the last quarter century. And there are some abstract ways of putting it, which I'll share, and then maybe I'll just read one little short page from the book to try to
Doc,
capture
you do whatever you want.
Too. So we've had this crazy, crazy world which has had these elevators of opportunity for some. And at the same time that we've been riding up on the elevators of opportunity, people that who are the same as us are ending up in unimaginably bad circumstances. We are kith and kin. We started out in the same place, and the divergence is hard to get your head around.
Right, exactly.
And it produces also these strange psychological blocks and walls. You go back to family reunions, and there's the complexity to navigate. We all experience this. You're talking about kind of isolation of being a black professional, and then there's a certain kind of wall with people you come from, but the people you come from, like, they're the ones you really know have your back at the end of the day. Like, that's really where that tight bond
my people
is, absolutely, all the way down.
Right.
And we experience that as individuals, like each of us going through that. And one of the things I'm trying to get at in the book is something incredible has happened to this country in the last quarter century. Okay, and you all know it, but I'm going to say it again. Income inequality has shot to historically unprecedented levels. From 1981 to the present, it went back up to, after a great egalitarian period in the middle of the 20th century, up to the level of 1927 before the stock market crash, in terms of the percentage of income going to the top percentage of the population. Okay, it's just this incredible upward line. And exactly parallel to that is the line of mass incarceration, starting also in 1981, all right? So in the 70s, lots of crazy stuff going on in the 70s, lots of bad stuff. It was actually a kind of egalitarian country. And we've let ourselves be torn apart. And that inside of relationships of that tearing has been felt. We've actually felt what the rise in inequality means in that tearing apart of groups of kith and kin, equal kith and kin. And another little way of capturing these changes, and this is hard to put this one in a way, I fully drive home the force of it. We've been talking a lot about the opioid crisis lately and the rise in mortality for working class white Americans. That is, their life expectancies have been shortening, sort of the one group in the country whose life expectancies have been shortening over the last decade, okay, working class white Americans. We say that a lot. What we don't say is that as our life expectancies have been shortening, they've been coming near to the life expectancies of working class African Americans. Okay, so if we're concerned about working class white Americans, we have to be equally concerned about working class black Americans. What we have experienced between the combined forces of the rise of income inequality and mass incarceration is a convergence of the fortunes of working class people regardless of the color of their skin. Now that's hard for us to take in because the country has kind of depended on some people being above other people in this kind of like final and permanent way, and it doesn't apply anymore. There's got some backlash going on to that. But what it means is we need to see that the problem is a problem for working class people regardless of their skin color. And we need to be lifting up all those people. So I have this dream about the egalitarian 70s, and I'm just going to read you, as I said, the one page at the very end of the book, which kind of just captures that egalitarian dream in the form of a poem, really, at the end of the day. So it's a little weird to go from the abstract to that, but no problem. Last chapter is called My Heart's Locket. And I should say one other little detail so you know. So my dad had 11 siblings, 12 kids grew up together, and then a subset moved to Southern California. That subset, a lot of cousins, but it's a super close subset was me, my brother was 18 years younger than me, and then the 3 kids in my Aunt Karen's family, Nicholas, Rosalind, Michael. We were all 18 months younger than the others, so like think 5 porch steps. Like I was the bossy old one, right? Okay. But we all just played all the time, football, baseball, climbing trees, et cetera. That like, beautiful Southern California childhood.
And Karen is Michael's mother.
Yeah, exactly. In my heart's locket, 5 gangly brown-skinned kids, cousins, will be forever at play in a pair of crepe myrtle trees bathed in beneficent June sunshine. I love to climb trees as much as Michael. An arm here, a leg there, juts out from the tree's floral sundress, a delicate skein of pink and purple blooms. When we found unbloomed buds on the dichondra lawn, we would gently press at their nub until the skin slit and a fragile, crinkled blossom emerged whole. Meanwhile, inside the house, through the living room picture window, the adults, beloved, are forever passing their time in glancing, distracted talk.
Thank you. As we continue to talk about it's egalitarian and how you guys as a family were so close, but then also kind of apart, let's talk about how and where you grew up in Riverside versus how and where Michael grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and how that really intertwines all the way throughout this book and you guys' lives.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, so my dad is now a retired college professor. He was a college professor, so I grew up as a faculty brat in Claremont, California, actually. Yeah, Claremont. Michael's mom was a single mom. She had left the father of her 3 children, who was abusive. And she was steadily working her way up. So by the time that Michael was 3 or 4, she'd earned a nursing degree, gotten them into a little house out of a tiny apartment and so forth. She was very, very steadily, inch by inch, working her way up. And the family would gather at different people's houses, and there was a lot of kind of mutual support, right? So Karen was really focused on the basics: food on the table, shoes on the kids' feet, and her older brothers and sisters would, supply the Christmas presents and things like that. So within the family already, it's true that there is a kind of ecosystem of middle-class academic family on the one hand and working-class single mom on the other, but still extended family looking out for each other and so forth. And the real thing, I mean, when I had these why questions because it was really hard to understand. Michael was this incredibly bright, precocious kid. He was really good at school. When he was arrested, he was in an early college program at a community college in Los Angeles to help kids move through high school quickly and transition quickly to college. He was very hungry to go to college, and he had lots of exposure to all kinds of opportunities in life just through the extended family and things like that. So it's been hard to understand, what actually happened and so forth. And what became clear as I was interviewing family members and honestly, breaking through the shame that had kept people from talking to each other, is that my Aunt Karen, she'd been inching her way up piece by piece, got married, and the person she picked was not a good person for them. He was abusive, so again, it was a sort of pattern. She had been with an abusive person, she chose another abusive person, and the family sort of exploded. They moved about 5 times over a period of years. Michael had a bunch of mid-year school transitions as she was trying to work her way out of this relationship. And at the end of this period, Michael kind of was deposited back into South Central, very much sort of on his own, coming into a world that was structured by gangs, and where you had to pick a side, basically, to get protection from the kinds of exchanges of violence and the violence between the gangs and police and that sort of thing. And so, at any rate, that, so I don't think, when I put my middle-class childhood next to Michael's working-class childhood, I don't think that was decisive, to be honest. I think that could have gone a different direction. I think the decisive thing was this trouble in a relationship. And it was, my father and Karen are super close. They talk all the time, even to this day. And yet it wasn't until I was working on this book that my father learned that Karen had been beaten by the man she married in the late 80s. So shame keeps people so powerfully from saying what the trouble is, and keeps us all, I think, from grappling with social damage, as I was saying before, that we need to be able to respond to.
And so, Michael, as you stated, he had to deal with the gangs and the issues on the outside of his home, but he also had to deal with the things inside of his home. He had a very loving mother, but she was abused, so therefore she couldn't probably give him the type of love and attention that he may have needed while he was grappling with trying to make that decision between the gangs. Whereas in your scenario, it was a much more robust family life.
Tightly controlled.
Yeah, exactly.
You could say.
I mean, I think you said the only time you got grounded is because you took a ride to an extra credit French class or something
That's
like
right,
that.
yes.
And you weren't supposed to get in a car with someone else. I mean,
Yeah, no, that's true.
my mother would have loved to hear that.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, that was, my parents, it's true, were very hard lines. I wasn't allowed to ride in cars.
Right.
Driven by other teenagers, and one day I was tired of walking from high school to the local college for my extra credit French class. So I had another friend who was going, so I took a ride, and my mom, of course, the one time I did it, my mom saw me, and I got grounded. So yeah, so I did live in a place where people knew you. My parents decided not to move, to have a really steady, just be in one place, have their kids be known by everybody around them, and bring that community into keeping those kids under close watch.
Right. So the impact of being in an environment that's nurtured to push you towards everything you're doing versus the environment that Michael grew up in, and many people like myself grew up in. I don't think my environment is as bad as Michael's.
Right.
I had a very good home life, but I resonate with some of the things he dealt with. Do you see that as being a very decisive factor in how things go in individuals' lives?
I do think that is a hugely important part. So one of the things I try to do in the book is just to show how decisions at all levels matter. So we get into this fight, is it society and the system, or is it the person, or is it the family structure? And my argument is it's everything, okay? Michael made bad decisions. We, his family, failed him in various ways. We didn't see what was going on with him. It was very painful to work on this book and discover that this family member had this little piece of information and that family member had this little piece of information. And if you took all the puzzle pieces and put it together, you could actually have seen what was happening to him in that 6 months before he got arrested, that he was starting to flirt with gangs, et cetera, which we did not know. And so the fact that we didn't know that, for me, goes back to us, and again, not talking, not bringing to the surface things that people had spotted and were worried about, but they didn't say anything out loud about, right? Because you don't want to mess in other people's business, so you sort of stay away. And I feel now we just all have to mess in each other's business, right? We just have to get over that hesitation and that hurdle. But to your point, I thought the other thing you was going to say was, it's the other thing, again, there's so many sort of layers of craziness to the experience of working on this. So I had sort of drafted a whole version of this story before I learned the other meaning of cuz.
She didn't know Crips say cuz.
Crips call each other cuz.
Y'all probably didn't know that.
All right. Why was Michael calling me cuz? Because he had begun to flirt with the Crips. All right. But little middle class me didn't know that and didn't hear it. Another one of my cousins that was the little piece that he'd picked up. And so when I was interviewing him for this book, he said, just a couple of months before Michael got in trouble, I remember he called me cuz for the first time, and it made my blood curdle. Because, he said, my other cousin, grew up in a Bloods neighborhood. He was lucky because he grew up there. I said, how did you did not participate in this world. How could you grow up there and not participate in it? And his answer to that question was, basically, because I grew up there, everybody knew I was from that neighborhood, that I belonged to that community, so I didn't have to do anything to prove it. So I could skirt around the edges and not be involved and be safe. But nonetheless, I thought, the fact that Michael called me cuz when he knew I was from a Bloods neighborhood made my blood curdle. And Michael, on the other hand, again, coming in from outside, not having grown up there, not being known, not having an affiliation or an identity, had to prove something.
Absolutely. And so as we're talking about the story, getting up to the point of Michael attempting carjacking or attempted robbery or something. But before that, Michael was in summer camps, Michael was in karate, Michael was in gymnastics. I mean, he was a very active kid doing things that any normal kid would do. How was he during that time period before you saw the change in Michael?
So, this is, again, he was just this vivacious person. He lit up a room, he could draw communities together, he loved sports, he loved being outside. Being outside was really, really important to him, and when he was incarcerated, he ended up spending a number of years fighting wildfires for the state of California, and that was probably the best part of his life. There's sort of a line in the book which is that, retrospectively, I can see that Michael actually had one really good year in his life. Even in prison, you can actually say that. You could see he was happy fighting all those fires and being outside and maximizing his potential.
He met Bree that year, too.
He did, exactly. They fell in love, yeah. But so I guess the thing I was going to get at was just a couple of things. One, that need to be outside was not a need that could be safely met and helpfully met in South Central, right? A kid who needed to be outside was going to be, meeting up with other people and connecting with things and so forth. So that was one thing. But then the other thing to say is, I really wrestled with this issue of, this was a kid who, yes, so in Claremont, and before he moved back to South Central, he shoplifted once and he stole a radio from a neighbor's house, and his mother took him to the police station and turned him in about that. And so that was, in that regard, he was starting to, petty theft. He was starting to experiment in that regard in this period right before he went to South Central. And that was surprising, and we all were concerned, and people were focused in on that. But so then that left this mystery of how had he, in a short span of time, gone from that to really super violent actions? What had happened? It felt, I had this image in my head of, I don't remember if you remember those old vacuum tubes from drive-through banks. There's whisk something up. I feel like that's what had happened to him somehow. And how do you explain that? And that's when I just, for various reasons, I have this analytical lens in my head from the Declaration of Independence. Okay, no, that's not what you guys were expecting me to say right then. All right, but I do. I've worked a lot on the Declaration of Independence, written a lot about it for various reasons. And what it teaches you to do is to analyze a world by asking the question, what laws are keeping people from flourishing? So let me back up a minute and explain why that question matters. So I had this vacuum tube feeling about what had happened to Michael, something not explainable in kind of normal steps had happened to him. And in addition, it wasn't just happening to Michael, it was happening to so many young black men. So it was something else was going on, something else had to be explained that was generating this pandemic of this vacuum tube acceleration of experience. And so that's when you see things like that you have to ask this question, what's structuring the world that generates incentive systems that leads to a completely different kind of equilibrium of behavior than you would otherwise have? And the answer is usually laws of some kind are structuring the world. Okay, that's what the Declaration teaches you to do. Look around and figure out what laws are hindering human flourishing. And the answer to that question is the drug laws. All right? And the reason is because they have generated what I call the parastate, an alternative universe of law and order, going through the looking glass, okay, that fights with the legitimate state. All right? Now, why should there be such a thing as the parastate? Every 3.5 days, Americans spend $1 billion on drugs. Okay? Making $100 billion by the end of the year. Every year, $100 billion. All right? Now, the state wanted to get rid of that illegal trade in the 1980s, targeted, to some significant extent, low-level distributors. If you ran a $100 billion business and somebody was trying to take away your distribution network, what would you do? You'd fight to keep it. And so you get these structures of violence, intense forms of deterrence inside the chains linking from cartels down to street gangs, and patterns of violence that do put street gangs into fights with the legitimate state. And in that regard, you get, in the 80s and 90s, you got incredible worlds of violence. I think in Chicago, that's some of what we're seeing right now as well. And when you read the literature on how young people get involved in gangs, the theme that comes out over and over again is that they find themselves in a world where they feel they need protection. And the first people who offer them protection are from gangs. And they accept the invitation to protection, and then it's very hard to get out. And the pattern, at least that's documented in the literature, is that kids flirt with gangs for about 18 months and they have their first arrest. And that's the pattern that Michael experienced. So what I'm trying to say is it kind of didn't matter what kind of kid he was. What mattered was that he was a kid without protection in a place where the protection on offer was coming from what I call the parastate.
Well, he's almost not just a kid without protection, but he was actually under attack.
In some sense,
From the gangs and from the state with its so-called drug war.
Yeah, I mean, so
you talk about that in the book extensively.
Yeah, I mean, so it's just, some of the details are kind of extraordinary when you look back on that time, and they're worth bearing in mind because of the conversations we have today. But so in Los Angeles, when Michael was arrested, the city of Los Angeles had half of the young African-American men in Los Angeles in their gang database. Okay? So it's like, maybe they were in gangs or maybe they weren't, but once you've got half of the young African-American men in your database, then there's basically not a young African-American man in the city who's not going to be, in some sense, affected by those projects of surveillance and that effort to tackle that street-level distribution process. And there's a lot, so the book does end up having a lot of history about the drug market, drug business, and that kind of thing in this, which was very hard to piece together. But I felt like I had to actually piece that together in order to understand this vacuum tube thing that had happened to Michael. Because again, it was about being somehow in a completely different context really fast. It's what economists refer to as a kind of phase shift, a kind of equilibrium phase shift. So he'd been in one kind of social equilibrium and then found himself in a very different social equilibrium with very different kinds of dynamics. And so, again, my other cousin grew up from birth all the way through, just a few blocks away, same neighborhood. So it's true that people can make it through these environments. But what I think of it as this way, sort of, in the last Summer Olympics, I don't know if you remember, there was this gymnast, I want to say her from India, maybe Kamakar was her name, I'm not going to get her name right exactly right now. And she was doing this move, a vault, called the Protonova. Do you guys remember this? Okay, it's the highest degree of difficulty vault in gymnastics. So the media coverage about her was just feverish. It was like, is she gonna make it, or is she gonna break her back? Is she gonna make it, or is she gonna break her back? Okay, she made it. That was the good news. But the point is that for young people growing up in this context, they have a much higher degree of difficulty. And so yes, some people can make it, but everybody else is gonna break their back. All right, and that's the important fact about the context.
And when we talk about the structures, the legal structure, the legal system, when Michael was going through the legal system, one thing you talk about a lot in the book is, as a family, even the middle class, PhD family, you had no real concept of the legal system. And
Yeah.
therefore, when he was going through and he was they're going to decide they're going to charge him as an adult or as a juvenile, you all thought, obviously he would be charged as a juvenile,
That's right. Yeah.
But he was not charged as a juvenile, he was charged as an adult.
Yep.
And so it was fascinating to me because I see this a lot in every day, people not understanding the legal system and having, quite frankly, more trust in the legal system than they should,
Yeah.
based upon the reality of the history. Can you
Yeah.
talk about, from you guys' perspective, and how they
Yeah.
impacted you?
No, I mean, that's completely fair. I mean, people always, I mean, it is strange to say that when Michael was arrested, in 1995, we entered into the process with a sense of trust in the legal system. Because people think, well, how, after the 20th century experience of African Americans, like, how could you approach it with a sense of trust? Okay, I don't have an answer for that question, okay, folks? But we did. And
most black people do, still today.
yeah. So at any rate, there was the lawyer was court appointed, and there was some discussion in the family about getting a lawyer, but for reasons that I still find a little hard to get to the bottom of, the adults felt confidence in the lawyer that they had. Retrospectively, they should not have had that confidence. I think the person was very well-intentioned, certainly was putting their heart into the work, but did not. So, any number of things. So, for example, Michael was charged. So the carjacking, before he asked for the car, he asked for the guy's watch and wallet. So the guy gave him the watch and wallet, and then he asked for the car, and then the guy got the gun and shot him. That was basically, it was a very quick, short thing. The car was parked. It was in a carport. And Michael was charged for attempted carjacking and robbery. Now, retrospectively, to my eye, that looks like should have been attempted robbery, for example. It's just a teeny little thing, but that kind of thing wasn't pushed back on. And similarly, there were, they did a kind of lineup for the robberies he'd confessed to, and Michael was not identified by the victims in a lineup, and nobody pushed back on the use of those charges in the case, for example. So at any rate, there's just a lot of legal work that could have been done. There should have been proactive defense around the juvenile versus adult thing. But part of what was happening too was just that the legal landscape was changing so fast in California at that particular moment that just at the level of kind of ordinary understanding of what the laws were, we were just like literally taken by surprise. And so, for example, if you hear about a 3 strikes you're out law, which you understand the purpose is to put multiple time offenders away for a long time, will you think it's going to be applied to somebody who's been arrested for the first time? No. It's like literally never occurred to us that it was relevant, right? And now that's a really idiotic thing retrospectively. Anyway, so it just goes on like that. And yeah, it's like these were like people with PhDs and teachers and things like that involved in the family in working on this case. So for me, another one of the kind of takeaways is, like we had a heck of a lot of education and we couldn't master the system.
Exactly. So what about people that's in Michael's situation but don't have any access to you,
Yeah.
or even below where Michael was?
No, exactly. Like, in some sense, we should be like the best case scenario, right? For like making it through, but.
Basic things such as when he can so-called confess to these crimes in an ambulance.
Yeah.
No one challenged that.
Nobody challenged that, exactly. No adult was present.
So we don't really know if he confessed or not.
That's true, we don't really know. But I do think that he did do those things. So he never actually told me that he did that list of things that is sort of reported in the court documents, but he did tell me that he had done at least one other thing that week. Right. So I'm willing to, just grant that he did do those things, but it's true. The confession was, he'd been shot through the neck. He confesses. There's a policeman in the ambulance. He confesses then. That's the confession that's used for these legal proceedings.
And so when he has the hearing to decide if he's going to be an adult or a juvenile, you guys had a great witness that could have spoken on his behalf, but you decided to go with a different witness.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because that was very fascinating and where we are as a society from.
It's true.
why the decision was made not to use the great witness.
Yeah. So I was not there. So when I'm narrating that story, I'm doing it based on interviews with family members. So I have to kind of answer from that perspective. So yes, this was a hearing about whether he should be tried as an adult or a juvenile. And my Aunt Rosalind was a third of my father's generation who was very, very close to Karen and my dad and spent a lot of time with Karen and her kids and would sometimes have them in the summers and things like that. So it was part of this network. And she was run for political office in the Bay Area. She was a teacher, a social worker, college educated, that kind of thing. Could have been a character witness for Michael. Was lesbian, she's passed away. And that reason seems to be, I never actually quite got anybody to say this totally out loud to me, but that seems to be the reason she was not put on the stand. That a combination of the lawyer and probably my Aunt Karen made that decision. And instead, a pastor who the pastor of the church that Karen and the kids went to was put on the stand, and Karen's perception was a man of God. His word would hold weight. He turns out to be a very complicated figure with his own sort of shady past, and had developed a ministry for sort of kids on the street in South Central, and when he got up, invoked, in his language, a pastor-parishioner privilege and wouldn't talk about Michael.
That was just astounding to read that.
And so that was kind of the end of that.
And then he's bound over as an adult, and then he doesn't go through trial.
Doesn't go through trial.
Because they offer him, he was going to get 25 to life.
Right. And they didn't tell him what the other option would be.
Right.
It was just, here's your moment. You plead guilty and we'll sentence you, or in a discretionary way, or be convicted and we will, you'll get this mandatory minimum.
And the judge said, basically, please take this plea out.
That's
I
right.
put you in prison for life.
That's right.
So then Michael was put in prison.
Yeah.
And you guys, he's in LA, but he's sent up to prison up by the Oregon-California line.
Yeah. So not strictly immediately. So the judge that sentenced him wrote a letter to the correctional department, Department of Corrections, advocating that Michael be kept in juvenile to the maximum age level then, which was 25 at the time. And I had to file Freedom of Information request, state level equivalence, to get Michael's legal and court materials. And the piece that I've never been able to get is the piece that would explain why nobody did that. They didn't do that. And similarly, I've not been able to get the piece that then explains why the moment he turned 17, they transferred him from a juvenile facility to adult facilities and sent him to, Susanville, which is basically on the Oregon border, and was too far for his mother, working person, to get to him. And so he spent the first 6 months in adult prison at 17 without a family visit.
And what was so striking to me about the letter from the judge versus what the California law stated, that because they had lowered the level that you could be charged as an adult, from 17 to 16 to 14, which caught Michael up.
Yeah.
It shows the real weakness of individual acts of charity versus actual policy. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're always talking about here in Oklahoma with policy and whatnot. You had a judge who had an individual act of charity, morality, whatever, had a heart.
That's right.
But the policy was, he's 17, he can be an adult, send him up here.
Right. Yeah, no, that's right. And that is a theme of the book in a certain way. So I said, levels of responsibility. I didn't quite finish that thought. So it's, Michael's decisions, our family and how we supported him or failed to, and then it's also policy and society and the structure of our legal institutions and our judicial institutions. All three of those things bear responsibility. And one of the things I am trying to convey in the book about how to understand the relationship among those pieces and parts is, how to put this, I'm partly trying to give relief to people who day after day are working their hearts out to make a difference for one specific person and can't turn the mountain round, because it's not you. It's not you. You're working against something that is too hard for individual acts of charity to make that transformative difference. And that is something that I know through and through at this point. And so that is one of the messages that I'm trying to convey. Yes, individual responsibility matters. Yes, families matter. Yes, we all need to up our game on those points. But I truly believe even upping our game on those points will not turn this mountain around. Will not.
I think another example of that, I don't want to talk too much about it now, I'm getting kind of ahead of me, but when Michael, after 11 years when he was paroled, the policy stated he could not stay where he was a functional, important firefighter. He had to be paroled back by law to the county where the crime happened, where he did not have the type of infrastructure so he could be successful. I mean, let's just talk a little bit about that, and I want to go back through prison with Michael.
Okay.
But that just strikes me when you say that.
No, it's a huge thing. So one of the things I spend a lot of time, were you signaling us that we should be, okay. We'll transition
what
to
time
Q&A.
is
We're
Sorry, it's been an hour? Oh, my God.
So I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and that's partly because as an academic, the first thing I did was write a book on punishment in ancient Greece. Go figure. Okay, anyway, we could talk about that, but it's relevant and it matters because up until the middle of the 19th century, the world had this strange mixture of really aggressive judicial systems, like lots of executions for like things that we would not execute people for now, like just tons of executions on the one hand, and a really forgiving system because exile was actually one of the most important sanctions. Exile was a second chance sanction. Just get on out of here, all right? We don't want to see your face again. Heals the community, and the person gets a fresh start. That's why we have Australia. That's why we have the state of Georgia, all right? And by the middle of the 19th century, the earth had been completely carved up into sovereign territories. And the world lost its best second chance punishment. And I think of that in relationship to Michael's case because like, exile did exactly what this did the opposite of, like put them right back in the middle of the trouble. Oh yes, that's a really good idea, right? No, like exile is like, okay, ultimately, this person is not pathological. This is not a pathological case. They can start fresh in a new place, in a different set of social relations. That's the key thing, a different set of social relations. So we really need to figure out how to make a second chance kind of set of sanctions, which we don't have. And for me, the sharpest way of putting this point is to call out a contrast, okay? That in this country, in the US, 70% of our sanctions are incarceration, okay? Which is not a second chance penalty, not really. In Germany, 6% of their sanctions are incarceration. In the Netherlands, 10%. Okay, so it is actually possible to build a sanctioning system that does not, in the first instance, depend on incarceration. It is not a utopia. It just takes a plane ticket to go find it. Okay? Second chance sanctions. That's what we need. So sorry, my answers were very long.
So we've got a microphone here. If you've got a question, I can come to you. And
Hi, yes. I just wanted to know, so in the Netherlands, do they have, like, prisons for profit? Do they have private prisons there?
That's a good question. I don't actually know the answer to that. I mean, my guess would be no, but I don't actually know that for a fact. Does anybody else know the answer to that? Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's such a smaller part of their system. There's not a market, right, for it the way there is here.
I just wanted to hear the end of your, you're not going to move the mountain, your family's not going to move the mountain. What would be your top 2 suggestions for how we move the damn mountain?
So, because I'm a political philosopher, I do get out ahead of people to some extent, okay? But my answer is legalize marijuana, decriminalize harder drugs, treat addiction as a health problem, not a criminal justice problem. That means building up health services that can actually support provision of addiction treatment, redirect criminal justice resources to tackling the high-level traffickers. I mean, to some extent, they are already directed that way. I don't want to misstate in that regard, but direct more focusedly on the high-level traffickers, the process, the work of interdicting drug trafficking for the harder drugs. It's not a silver bullet, because there will still be addiction, there will still be problems with drugs. Once you have networks of black markets and things like that, those who participate in those networks often will find substitute products. So for example, my favorite example of that is that Mexican cartels, you want to know what they used to run? Anybody know? Televisions. Prior to NAFTA, they used to run TVs from North America into Mexico. That is better than the current world, though I have to say, actually, that little detail. But anyway, so the point is just the work of breaking up kind of international criminal trafficking is really, really hard work. Merely changing drug control policy inside domestic states won't fully address that problem, but I think what it will do is build healthier domestic spheres, somewhat disconnect that problem of international trafficking and the way it reaches into our societies from the health of our societies. Again, because we are a third of the world's drug market. All right? I mean, it's like, we just got to be honest about this.
So Oklahoma is in a place right now with our vote coming up on June 26th where it's likely that we're going to legalize medical marijuana. And yet we have this psychological shift that we're all, I think, in this room wrestling with in our own families and our friend groups right now, people who are so used to thinking of drugs as not only criminal but evil. As you're telling the stories about your cousins, I'm thinking about some of my own cousins and my aunties who have really demonized them for the use of marijuana and other things like that. How have you experienced helping those around you shift psychologically and philosophically that perspective to help them open up for these structural changes?
That's a great question, and I think it's a hugely important one. I mean, to some extent, I'm in that category of people. So for me, drugs were just like the worst of the worst thing. And so for me to become a legalizer is a pretty big change of perspective and orientation. And it matters to me to say, legalization isn't about like party, like that's not the point or the message. It's about, it's still about drug control. It's just about healthy practices of drug control and fundamentally recognizing that the issues here are health issues, mental health issues, addiction as a health issue. And then the question what's the underlying causes of the mental health needs that are generating that need for addiction, and sort of actually directing the intelligence and the compassion and the commitment of our society to tackling that health question. I think if you can emphasize the health aspects of it, it helps a lot. But it's important not to be flip. So for example, marijuana is dangerous for young people with a genetic predisposition to schizophrenia. It's a trigger. we all need to know that and not be cavalier about marijuana use, even if it's something that is legal, right? It just does, so you got in that regard, think about alcohol, think about tobacco, et cetera. Learning to have that kind of relationship to it.
Dr. Allen, I want to first extend my condolences to you and your family for the loss of such a lovely, beautiful young man.
Thank you.
I was kind of, sitting here thinking to myself, we kind of live in a very virulent, authoritarian period of time. And this seems to be like one of the issues or the problems we would have in going forward. Do you feel that that's a legitimate concern? And if it is, how would we think about, I don't know, somehow changing the dialogue or the script that seems to be driving our paranoia and fear, I suppose?
Well, I think that the people who matter most in this country are the people in this room and in every state. And I think every state has it within its reach to transform these questions. And I think that's the most important thing. And when I talk to people about civic agency, civic responsibility, and what's entailed by that, as folks at Oklahoma Policy know today, heard me about today, I have one really compact reminder about what the work is. So you'll have to forgive me, but it's my gift I like to give people. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these, just a set of examples, people, are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principle and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. The people in this room know the principles we need to build our foundations on: human dignity, equality, freedom for all, meaning freedom from domination. And we can see how the powers of government, in the form of the laws in our criminal justice system, are destructive of those ends. So we need to change them. And we can do that in every state. And if we do that in every state, we will change the world.
I think that's the place to end it. That was fantastic. Another round of applause for Danielle Allen. Copies of Cuz are in the back corner by the door where you came in, and Danielle will be signing the books. A reminder to go and check out the stuff from Oklahoma Policy and also the ACLU. They've got information there too. I forgot to mention that earlier. They're back there as well. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Originally a sprinter and a jumper, so 100 and 200, and then last leg, well, not last leg, but leg on the mile relay. And long jump and triple jump. But then I was also a volleyball player, and weightlifting ruined my knees.
Oh, wow.
Which turned me into only a jumper, sadly.